I am currently in Mecca, and this is the holiest place on the face of the planet. And there is a story that took place here a few thousand years ago that will prove to you that most likely you do not understand the concept of tawakkul properly. In order for me to tell you this story properly, let me lay some foundations. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهِ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقُهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ وَمَن يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whoever has taqwa in Allah, Allah will grant a way out for them from every difficulty possible and will provide for them from places they do not even imagine. Then Allah says, وَمَن يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ. Whoever puts their trust and has tawakkul in Allah, then Allah is sufficient for them. طيب, why is this very, very interesting? Because before Allah mentions tawakkul, Allah mentions taqwa. Taqwa, as described by Umar ibn Khattab, is like walking through a valley of thorns, where you watch every single step, being very careful not to catch yourself and cutting yourself such that you bleed, right? The analogy is essentially saying that when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you watch your every single step in your thoughts, in your actions, in everything, earning the pleasure of Allah and avoiding the displeasure of Allah, just like you avoid the thorns in the valley. That's what taqwa is. Then you go to tawakkul. Now, again, a lot of people think that tawakkul is just relying upon Allah. That's not entirely correct. It's only part correct. You cannot leave your house open overnight and say, Ya Allah, I trust you that my house is not going to get robbed. You can't do that. Tawakkul has two components. You do everything you can in your situation, and then you leave the rest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in this one verse that I've shown you, Allah has basically said there is a necessity for you to have taqwa and then apply tawakkul so that the whole package is done, and then Allah will be sufficient for you. If a king came to you and said, hey, listen, I'm sufficient for you, how would you feel? Whenever you have any financial problems or you have any problems in general, right? You would go to the king, call him up, hey, I need help, and he would help you. Tayyib, what about the King of Kings? What about the one who created the entire universe? What about the one who can do anything from nothing, right? In order for Allah to be sufficient for you, you need to have taqwa before you have tawakkul in all of your affairs. And now I am ready to introduce to you the story that took place here a few thousand years ago that will really make you understand this deeply. Ibrahim alayhi salam was commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to leave Hajar and her son in the middle of a desert. This desert, consequently, was where I am right now, in Mecca. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes Mecca as Wadin ghayri dhi zar'. There was just an empty, barren desert. There's no plants, there's no vegetation, there's no buildings, there's no people, there's nothing. It was just an empty desert. And so wherever Hajar would look, forwards, backwards, left and right, it would be the exact same. But one thing about Hajar that all of us know is that she had taqwa. She loved Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. She loved His deen. She did everything she could to commit to it. She had full trust and reliance in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and lived her life seeking the pleasure of Allah and avoiding the displeasure of Allah. So she had the taqwa aspect. But then you have to ask yourself, did she have the tawakkul aspect? Think about it. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded for you to be in the middle of a desert with your child who's crying and you're all sweating and there's no food or water to be seen, how would you feel? You would be absolutely devastated. You might even start having bad thoughts of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and even thinking bad things and saying bad things, right? Well, Hajar did not do that. What did she do? She did everything she can in her ability whilst trusting that Allah willed the best for her. And so she ran from one mountain to the next mountain, exerting all of her efforts from Safa to Marwa, back and forth like this, whilst making sure her heart is tied to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what was the result of that? Jibreel came along by the command of Allah, smacked the ground, and thus sprouted Zamzam, which has been feeding billions upon billions of Muslims ever since for thousands of years. And Allah turned this barren desert, as He says in the Quran, later on, into a place of vegetation where you can find fruits of every kind, you can find people, we're surrounded by hotels which are huge, and literally every day you have millions of people from every corner of the earth coming to perform Umrah, where they copy the exact footsteps of Hajar going back and forth from Safa to Marwa. And this has been happening ever since her time, subhanAllah. All because of one thing, her taqwa coupled with her tawakkul. So ask yourself, when it comes to your life, can you say that you have taqwa? Can you say that you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so much that you will do anything to avoid His displeasure and earn His pleasure? Are you careful where you earn your rizq? Are you careful with your prayers, your obligations? Do you go above and beyond? Do you have that taqwa aspect? If that's the case, we can move on to step 2. When it comes to all of your affairs, do you have tawakkul? If you're trying to start a business, are you doing everything you can to make it succeed? If you have exams, are you doing everything you can to study? And then, are you leaving the results to Allah? If that's the case, you can tick the second box. And if that second box is ticked, then I guarantee you that Allah will be sufficient for you and you will see wonders just as Hajar saw wonders too. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.